Part 3, The Physical Benefits of Meditation. Chapter 8, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. Now that we've gotten past those barriers that you thought were separating you from meditation, it's time to get into some of the concrete ways that meditation will benefit your life. And as you'll see, there are many more benefits than perceived barriers. Specifically, I want to discuss the positive physical effects meditation will have on your brain. I said what I'm promoting in this book is science, and now I'm about to prove it. Some of it might get a little technical, but it's important to show that there are concrete physical benefits for meditation. It's very important to understand that scientists are learning that when you spend time in stillness every day, it will dramatically change how your brain operates. In addition to how it will impact the physical makeup of your brain. I also want to address the incredible benefits of meditation will have on your physical health, from lowering your blood pressure and stress levels to decreasing your chances of suffering heart disease and even helping you eat healthier. Meditation can play a huge role in helping you feel better and live longer. 2 parts to the brain. I want to start by talking about meditation's effect on the brain because despite it's being the part of the body we use the most every day, most of us have very little knowledge on how our brains actually work. Sometimes, and for many years, I was guilty of this myself, we make the mistake of thinking our brains are formless spaces in which ideas just float around. Or if we do think of our brains in a physical sense, it's only a big lump of gray gook. To use a political analogy, one pet peeve I have is that many people tend to refer to Africa as a country. It's always, in Africa, they need to do this, or in Africa, they should do that. But the truth is that Africa is made up of many different countries, cultures, languages, and perspectives. There are many, many layers to Africa. If you only view it as a single entity, then you're never going to truly understand it. Well, the same is true of your brain. You might only think of it as that featureless gray blob, but it actually has many different parts and layers, each with its own function and impact on your thinking and body. Which is why, if you only think of your brain as formless space, you're never going to be able to use it to its full potential. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, and you probably didn't pick up this book looking for a neurology lesson. So I'm going to try to not get too technical here. I do, however, want to break down 2 very important parts of your brain so you can begin to get a better sense of how your emotions are generated and in turn, how you can begin to use meditation to have better control over them. The first is the cerebrum, which is the largest part of your brain and is divided into right and left hemispheres. The left hemisphere is primarily where linear, logical, and language-based thinking takes place. To put it more plainly, if the left side of your cerebrum were a person, it'd be someone who's very logical and rational, like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. This is why we see a lot of so-called left brain types go into professions that focus more on following instructions and patterns than creativity, like science or accounting. The right hemisphere, conversely, is where your non-linear and emotional thinking takes place. If that side were a person, it'd be more like the comedian Robin Williams or the rapper DMX, someone who gives off a lot of uncensored emotion and energy, which is why when we talk about the right brain people, we're usually talking about creative types who have an affinity for art, music, and writing, the type of folk the world might call free thinkers. In fact, the reason why young children are so emotional is because they mainly use that side of their brains. It's not until around the age of 8 that we begin to show a preference for one side or the other. Now here's the thing. Even though the 2 sides of our cerebrum are physically connected by a bridge known as the corpus callosum, as we grow older, we stop utilizing it. The creative ideas tend to stay on the right, while the structured and orderly ideas tend to stay on the left. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with being a creative right side type, just as there's nothing wrong with being a logical, structured left side type. But no matter what type you are, wouldn't you like to tap into that underused side just a little bit more? If you're a creative thinker, you'd still probably like to have a little more order in your life. Just as if you're an accountant who loves figuring out the bottom line, you still might like to have more creative flashes than you normally do. One of the great benefits of meditation is that it helps you start using that bridge between your right and left sides again. We know this because recently, the UCLA Laboratory of Neuroimaging conducted a study using diffusion tensor imaging, or DTI, which is sort of like an MRI, to look at the structural connectivity of the brain. And they found that the corpus callosum was more connected with the right and left hemispheres in meditators than in people who didn't meditate. In other words, it's almost like growing old builds around a wall. It's almost like growing old builds a wall around your corpus callosum, and meditation helps knock it down. So by just sitting in silence every day, your tendency to lean heavily toward either the right or left side of your brain will slowly begin to come back into place. And when that balance returns, it's sort of like being a kid again. When it felt just as natural to spend an hour working on your handwriting as it did to spend an hour playing dress up and pretending that you were a pirate. When you didn't feel so disorganized and scatterbrained, just as you didn't feel creatively shackled. And when you begin to experience that childlike ability to be several things at once, it's incredibly liberating. I can remember during my first few months of meditating, being surprised that sometimes after I was done, I would find myself giggling like a little kid. Not because anything particularly funny had happened, but because I just felt childlike and free again. I'm pretty silly by nature, so at first I just chalked it up to general goofiness. But now I know what I was feeling wasn't a fluke or a coincidence. It was my brain starting to fire up parts of itself that had been underutilized for years. To put it another way, when you start to connect those two sides of your brain again, it's almost like meeting an old friend after many years. Except the old friend is you. Instinctively, you knew that creative thinker or organized person was always somewhere in you. You just didn't know where to find them. Meditation can reintroduce you to that part of yourself that's been missing for so long. Fixing your brain's alarm system. Meditation also has a powerful impact on what's known as your limbic brain. It's the part of your brain where your most basic emotions are generated. In particular, your fight or flight responses. Guarding the front of your limbic brain is a smaller, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Its job is to assess every new situation you encounter and then tell your limbic brain whether it's dangerous or not. To use an analogy, think of your limbic brain as a car owner and the amygdala as a car alarm system. Every time the car alarm detects what it perceives to be a threat, it's going to go off and make a lot of noise. Then it's up to the owner to decide if he's just going to deactivate the alarm and go back to sleep, or actually get up and investigate. Here's where the trouble starts. Every time your amygdala sounds its alarm, your limbic brain begins releasing stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. These secretions that create a sense of fear and anxiety in your body, those are important senses to have when you're facing a truly life-threatening situation. If someone is about to rob you on the street, or an animal is about to attack you in the woods, you want those secretions to be telling your body, it's time to get out of here, run. But they also come with a price. Extremely powerful, those hormones are also extremely toxic and stay in your body for several days after they're released, which is why you only want your body to be releasing them when it's absolutely necessary. So the question becomes, how can we train our amygdala to help distinguish between what's just annoying and what's truly life-threatening? To continue the analogy, to stop being one of those car alarms that goes off every time there's a storm or someone drives by playing loud music instead of only going off when someone is really trying to steal your ride. The answer, you probably won't be surprised to hear, is through meditation. By slowing down our pace and allowing our thoughts to come at us much more slowly, meditation gives our amygdala a chance to make more calm and measured assessments of situations. For example, consider someone cutting in front of you in a line, or swooping in at the last second and stealing a parking spot you've been waiting for. Those situations aren't at all life-threatening, but they'd still cause your brain to release adrenaline and cortisol, right? And in some of you, they produce so much adrenaline that you'll literally fly into a homicidal rage. But is the annoyance of losing a parking spot or your place in line really worth releasing toxins into your body? Of course not. You'll find another parking spot or get into that movie in a few minutes anyway, but you'll be stuck with those toxins for a long time. When your mind is calm, however, instead of telling our limbic brain to release its toxins, your amygdala will say, yes, I didn't like what just happened, but it's not worth sounding the alarm. Let this one slide. Now imagine if just 5 times a day, you were able to let a perceived slight or diss go, instead of reacting negatively to it. That instead of beginning to seethe when a coworker made a snide little comment, or slamming a door, you see that your son never cleaned up his room like you told him to, you were just able to shrug those moments off, to accept them without investing any energy in them. That would mean that 5 minutes a day, that 5 times a day, you wouldn't be needlessly releasing toxic chemicals into your body. Think about how much less tension your body will be carrying. Think about how much clearer your mind would be. Wouldn't that be a much freer way to live? More relaxed. Another wonderful physical benefit of meditation is that it helps relax your mind, especially if, like me, you sometimes struggle to get enough sleep. We've known that meditation produces deep restfulness since the 1970s, when a cardiologist named Dr. Herbert Benson conducted a study at Harvard where he measured the blood pressure, brain waves, and body temperatures of people meditating. He found that while they were meditating, they used 17% less oxygen, lowered their heart rates by 3 beats a minute, and decreased their beta brainwaves while increasing their alpha and theta brainwaves during sleep. Based on those findings, Dr. Benson concluded that the rest people receive during meditation is often as deep or even deeper than what they might experience during sleep. The reason he came to that conclusion was largely because of the impact meditation had on brainwaves. Whether we're awake or sleeping, there are always electronic signals pulsing through our brains known as beta, alpha, delta, theta, and gamma waves. Beta waves are usually associated with goal-oriented task and problem solving, while alpha and theta waves are associated with restfulness, and delta waves are normally most active during sleep. What Dr. Benson found, and what has been backed up in a recent study conducted by the University of Sydney in Australia, is that when we meditate, our beta waves decrease. This means that when you meditate, the part of your brain that is always working on making plans and solving problems, in other words, stressing, finally gets to take a break. This is a critical point, because a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that when they sleep, they are somehow turning off their mind. But after you go to sleep, those beta waves are still zipping back and forth in your brain. They're even darting around during REM, rapid eye movement sleep, which is considered the deepest part of sleep. Have you ever been stressed out over something and gone to bed early thinking that a good night's sleep will solve everything? But when you wake up 8 hours later, you still feel stressed and anxious. Well, you can thank those beta waves, because even though your body was resting during the night, your mind wasn't. It was still going through its paces, still trying to figure shit out and cook up strategies to deal with your life. By turning down those beta waves, meditation is essentially letting your thinking mind take a break from itself. If that weren't enough, it's also increasing your theta and alpha waves, which promote deep relaxation. This is why meditation can help you feel relaxed and focused even when you have trouble sleeping. Personally, I once went through a stage where I struggled with insomnia. Before I found meditation, I used to stay up at night thinking about not only what I perceived to be problems from the day that had just passed, but also what I thought would be problems in the day to come. But as I grew a little older, and also wiser, thanks to meditation and yoga, I started to understand that dwelling in the past and the future is a fundamental cause of suffering. And once I learned to live in the present instead of the past or the future, then my sleep became much more restful. Today, I still have occasional bouts of insomnia, but I've learned to accept it and not get hung up over a night or two of restlessness. If I've only gotten a few hours of sleep the night before, I still meditate the next morning, and I always feel refreshed afterward. Even when my body might be tired or dragging, my mind still feels sharp. You can retrain your brain. When we talk about fixing our brain's alarm system, creating better balance through reconnecting its right and left sides, or decreasing beta waves, we're making a very fundamental assertion that we are able to change our brains. A physical change that is going to promote emotional and spiritual happiness. This shouldn't exactly be breaking news. From the time of Buddha, the yogis have taught that you can improve your emotional and mental state by practicing meditation. They might not have had neuroimaging to prove it, but thousands of years ago, the yogis knew that meditation had this effect on your brain, just like Jesus knew it too. But for better or worse, it hasn't been till the last few decades that Western doctors have finally caught up to the science behind this ancient truth. One of the biggest misconceptions in Western medicine about our brains was that as we get older, they lose their ability to grow. The prevailing wisdom was that our brains reach their peak during adulthood, and then everything starts to go downhill the older we get. While that unfortunately might still hold true with the rest of our body, the good news is that scientists are beginning to discover that with the help of meditation, our brains can keep growing right into old age. Dr. Eileen Letters, a professor at UCLA, who helped run the study I mentioned earlier, recently told the medical journal Neuroimage, quote, regular use of meditation may strengthen the connections between neurons and can also make new connections. And these tiny changes in thousands of connections can lead to visible changes in the structure of the brain. Dr. Lutters says that their study found not only that meditation helped people's corpus callosum, Dr. Lutters says that their study found not only that meditation helped people's corpus callosum, that bridge between the brain's right and left sides, grow, but that it also promoted positive growth in the gray matter. Why is increased gray matter so significant? Because gray matter is one of the most important parts of your brain. The cells that make up your gray matter are responsible for your memory, sense of self, attention, and empathy. That's why, while 20% of the oxygen that comes into your body gets sent to your brain, once it's there, 95% of that oxygen gets routed directly to your gray matter. It's known that gray matter plays a critical role in development. Studies have found that children with autism, or who have sadly been abused or severely neglected as young children, have significantly less gray matter in their brains. So to know that meditation can help build up gray matter, even decades after scientists previously thought it would have stopped growing, is tremendous news. And the scientists at UCLA aren't the only ones coming to this conclusion. Recently, a team of researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital used MRIs to study the brains of people who had recently started meditating and found that even after just several weeks, their gray matter had begun thickening. Note, if you get a chance, try to check out Professor Hedy Kober's, Hedykober, TEDx talk about meditation on YouTube. She starts it off with the announcement that she has bad news and good news. The bad news is that shit happens, she says. The good news is that each and every one of you has the power to control and change your experience of this shit when it happens. You can learn and train yourself to have a better attitude about it. And her prescribed method for making that change? Meditation. End note. Practitioners have long claimed that meditation also provides cognitive and psychological benefits that persist throughout the day. Dr. Sarah Lazar, the study's senior author, told Science Daily, this study demonstrates the changes in brain structure may underlie some of these reported improvements and that people are not just feeling better because they are spending time relaxing. Another scientist, Richard Davidson, of the University of Wisconsin, found similar results in a study he did on Tibetan monks, who were master meditators. What we found is that the longtime practitioners showed brain activation on a scale we have never seen before, he told the Washington Post. Their mental practice is having an effect on the brain in the same way golf or tennis practice will enhance performance. And Yale University psychiatry professor Hedy Kober recently gave an incredible TEDx talk in Buenos Aires, where she described a study she and other Yale researchers conducted on the link between meditation and our brains. After studying how meditation affected the way people experience stress of nicotine withdrawal, Kober said she and her colleagues concluded that learning how to meditate can significantly alter your experience of stress and can change not only the way your brain functions during stress, but also the way it's structured over time. Kober added that the study convinced them that the brain is not made of plastic like a bucket, but rather that, like plastic, it can be molded into different shapes. So to put all this in layman's terms, meditation is going to help build up the part of your brain that promotes memory and emotion and help shrink that part that causes stress. Even at an age where you've been taught that not only has your brain stopped growing, but that it's on its way downhill. As I'm going to discuss in greater detail shortly, I doubt anyone reading this book has killed more of their brain cells than I have. During my teens, 20s, and even 30s, I smoked a ton of angel dust. There aren't many drugs that do more damage to your brain than dust. Considering how much cocaine, marijuana, and angel dust I put into my body over the years, I should barely be functioning by this point in my life. Yet here I am, in my 50s, and my mind feels as sharp and as focused as it ever has. And I know it's because of meditation. I might not have known before I started researching this book that it was because my gray matter is growing and my amygdala isn't getting overworked, but I could still feel it, even after only a few months of meditating. That's why, if you only take one message from this book, let it be this: you are not stuck with the brain that you have right now. As Dr. Davidson said, just like you can change your body through a consistent physical regimen, we now know that you can change the shape of your brain through the consistent practice of meditation. I don't care if you've been stressed out for years or been smoking pot every night since you were 13 years old. You can still change your brain through meditation if you want to. Some people like to call meditation push-ups for your brain. And while I hope you'll leave this book seeing that there's a lot more to it than that, it's not a bad analogy. Just as you know that if you do push-ups every day, you're going to have bigger muscles in a couple of weeks. It's no different with your brain and meditation. If you put in those 20 minutes twice a day, your brain is going to start growing in the areas that are helpful and shrink in those areas that can be harmful. I'm telling you this. The scientists are starting to tell you this, and the yogis have been telling people this for thousands of years. All you have to do is accept it and start the practice. Helping teenagers put on the brakes. Earlier, I was talking about the incredible impact meditation has been having in schools, especially those that experience lots of reckless behavior and acting out. Now I want to explain in scientific terms exactly why meditation does so much to help these young people cope with the stress of being a teenager. If you think cell phones, the internet, and social media are distracting to adults, imagine what teenagers are experiencing today. Personally, AM radio, some 45 records, a few comic books, and a handful of TV channels were enough for me growing up. But today, kids are growing up with hundreds of video channels, thousands of songs, cameras, and countless social media sites just on their phones, to say nothing of what's on their TV sets, computers, or gaming systems. Sure, I got distracted as a kid, but I also had quiet moments to balance it out. Before I moved to Hollis, who lived in Jamaica, Queens, and back then, there were woods near our house that had a lot of snakes in them. I actually used to spend hours searching for the snakes and even developed a little reputation as the only kid in the neighborhood who wasn't afraid to pick them up and play with them. When I got older, there weren't any snakes in Hollis, or at least not that kind. But I would spend hours sitting in the room I shared with my brother Joey, listening to records by R&B groups I loved, like Blue Magic, The Spinners, and the Delphonics. Today, it would be very hard to find those sorts of moments. Instead of wandering around the woods looking for snakes, I'd probably be in front of a TV playing video games. Or instead of lying on a bed with my eyes closed listening to records, I'd be sitting in front of my computer listening to songs in my headphones, while I simultaneously texted my friends, updated my Twitter, and updated my Facebook profile. Instead of getting lost in the music, I'd barely be paying attention to it. Those calm, focused moments are very hard for teenagers to find today. It's like they're being raised in the middle of Times Square under constant barrage from a never-ending stream of sights and sounds. But if we're going to allow our children to spend hours watching TV, surfing the net, and sending text messages, then we have to give them something to counterbalance all of that frantic energy, something to block out the noise and help them refocus on what's inside of them. Think of life as like an ocean of consciousness. When young people experience it, primarily through screens, TVs, computers, phones, etc., they're never straying too far from the surface of that ocean. What we need to do is teach them how to go past the surface and begin to experience life at its depths. That's because every level of stillness contains more and more peace, more and more happiness. We want to teach our teenagers that instead of always floating on the surface, they should be like one of those old-fashioned bell divers with a glass mask and air hose slowly sinking down to the bottom of the ocean. The deeper the diver goes, the more happiness he's going to encounter. So when he finally comes back up to the surface, he's going to bring a true treasure back with him, pure bliss and happiness. Again, this is the treasure we must share with our young people, because if we don't, they are always going to be stuck at the surface, always stuck checking that screen instead of looking within, always stuck listening to what their friends, peers, or screens tell them instead of what they know to be true in their hearts. Every young person needs to learn meditation. I don't care if your kids go to your local public high school, a difficult school in the hood, or a fancy boarding school. If they're constantly IMing, texting, Skyping, or whatever else is going to be hot by the time you read this, then they need some quiet time through meditation. We've seen that meditation helps grow the gray matter of the brain, and this is especially significant when it comes to teenagers. I learned this after I had heard a lecture sponsored by the David Lynch Foundation with Dr. Richard Friedman of Weill Cornell Medical College, who explained how meditation can actually slow down teenagers' tendency to get themselves into life-threatening situations. According to Dr. Friedman, one of the quirks of human development is that regions of the brain develop at different rates. This is especially true of the nucleus, or reward center of the brain, which drives risky behavior like sex, gambling, shoplifting, speeding in cars, accepting dares, etc. Basically, all the wild stuff that teenagers do that drives us adults crazy and gets them into so much trouble. Unfortunately, the nucleus develops faster than the rest of our brain, though there's a good reason for it. Young people need to take the risk of leaving the nest, the safety of living with their parents, and strike out on their own into the world. If that nucleus didn't develop so quickly, young people wouldn't feel as compelled to create their own lives. The issue is that the prefrontal cortex, which is the reasoning part of our brains, doesn't develop nearly as quickly. So while our nucleus might be fully functioning at 15, our prefrontal cortex doesn't really come into its own until our mid-20s. What this means, in layman's terms, is that between 15 and 25, our brains are good at taking risks, but not so good at being reasonable. Or to use Dr. Friedman's even simpler analogy, it's like teenagers are cars with fully developed accelerators and underdeveloped brakes. And as all teachers and parents can tell you, there are few things more frustrating and dangerous than a teenager who knows how to use his accelerator, but not his brakes. The good news is that in his studies, Dr. Friedman found that meditation helps teenagers develop their brakes much quicker. By increasing the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, meditation allows teenagers to bridge the gap that normally exists between the risk-taking and reasoning parts of their brain. What this means is that a teenager who in the past might have taken that dare to push their car up to 100 miles an hour on a straightaway, or shoplift a dress, or even take a gun to school, won't be as prone to making that foolish decision after learning how to meditate. When they feel the impulse to do something crazy, instead of putting the pedal to the metal, they might actually tap the brakes a few times instead. My daughters are just becoming teenagers now, and you can best believe I make sure they meditate every day, most of the time with me. They've actually already been meditating for several years, and there's no doubt that it's changed their lives dramatically for the better. Part of it's due to the increased compassion and focus it's brought them, but the ability to slow down and be calm when everyone else about them is speeding up is a large part of it too. As a parent, it's always tough to send kids out into the world and worry that they may get caught up in something dangerous or harmful. Knowing that my kids are meditators gives me confidence that no matter what situations they find themselves in, especially as they grow older, They're going to approach them from a calm and controlled space, as opposed to a reckless and distracted one. Chapter 9, How Meditation Helps Your Body. While meditation's benefits for your brain alone should be enough to get anyone to sit down and start the practice, I want to highlight some of the incredible things meditation can do for the rest of your body too. I've spoken about stress a few times already, but I want to point out here that stress isn't just an emotional condition. Remember, stress is what activates your fight or flight response, which is in turn what sends all those powerful toxins into your bloodstream. So while you might think of stress as a mood that you sometimes go through, the fact is that it is having very negative physical effects on your body. Or to put it even plainer, stress will make you physically sick and eventually kill you. One of the most common ways that stress breaks us down physically is through high blood pressure. When you are constantly stressed out and anxious, it causes your blood pressure to rise. And once that happens, you become less likely to exercise and more likely to overeat. Soon you find yourself in a vicious cycle that more often than not leads to deadly conditions like strokes and heart disease. In fact, the Centers for Disease Control estimates that 69% of people who have a first heart attack, 77, repeating. In fact, the Centers for Disease Control estimates that 69% of people who have a first heart attack, 77% of people who have a first stroke, and 74% of people who have chronic heart failure have high blood pressure. So, while it's tempting to pass high blood pressure off as one of the realities of modern life, the cold truth is that heart disease is the leading cause of death in America, killing over 500,000 people every year. It's especially deadly in the African American community, where according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, people are 40% more likely to develop high blood pressure than in other ethnic groups. And it's really a stone cold killer for Black women, who the DHHS estimates are 30% more likely to die from heart disease than white men. Thankfully, meditation has been proven to be extremely effective in reversing that cycle. The National Institutes of Health, the American Medical Association, the American Heart Association, the Mayo Clinic, and scientists from Harvard and Stanford have all stated that meditation can reduce stress and high blood pressure. A recent study by Dr. Norman Rosenthal, a world-renowned psychiatrist and author who works with the David Lynch Foundation, even found that people who practice meditation are 30% less likely to die from heart disease. His findings were backed up in a recent study published in the journal Circulation, Cardiovascular Quality and Outcomes, in which a group of people with coronary heart disease were asked to take a class on transcendental meditation, TM. More about TM later. Over the next 5 years, the group experienced a 48% reduction in the risk of heart attack, stroke, and death. Based on all these findings, some insurance companies are starting to reimburse people with high blood pressure for transcendental meditation instruction. I've spoken to Dr. Rosenthal about this, and he told me that it's a very important development in terms of how we treat heart disease in this country. Think about it. Right now, if you develop high blood pressure, how do you get treated? You're told to cut down on salt, exercise more, and start taking a pill like Lipressor or Prenavil. Pills that are going to cost you thousands of dollars each year and potentially create side effects like insomnia, fatigue, depression, dizziness, and erectile dysfunction. Pills that, once you are on them, you are probably going to have to stay on for the rest of your life. But with meditation, there aren't any prescriptions you have to pay for every month, just as there aren't any side effects. If anything, meditation not only lowers your blood pressure, but also makes you more rested. I haven't seen any studies yet, but I can tell you that it certainly doesn't cause erectile dysfunction. In fact, research has suggested that meditation can help reverse erectile dysfunction. So meditation is not only saving lives, it's creating new ones too. So before you become one in 3 Americans who develop high blood pressure, give meditation a try. Instead of committing to a pill, Cooked up by a big pharmaceutical company? Commit to taking 2 20-minute mini vacations every day. Mini vacations that are proven to make you 30% less likely to meet up with the most aggressive killer out there. Let that sink in. Meditation is going to give you a 30% better chance than the rest of the population to beat the #1 killer in the country. Who wouldn't want to beat those odds? Change yourselves for the better. While the statistics for meditation's effectiveness for lowering high blood pressure are really encouraging, I want to mention a couple of other areas where research is finding that meditation is very effective in improving our health. In 2013, a study by the University of California found that men with prostate cancer who started practicing meditation, exercising, and following a vegetarian diet, which I also highly recommend, were able to rejuvenate their damaged cells. Specifically on a cellular level, we all have little protective caps on our chromosomes called telomeres, kind of like those little caps at the end of your shoelaces that keep them from coming apart. When those cell caps start to separate, it's a message to your body that the cells are no longer healthy and are ready to die. Which is why a lot of scientists believe there is a connection between short-ended telomeres and deadly cell diseases like cancer. Repeating, a lot of scientists believe there is a connection between shortened telomeres and deadly cell diseases like cancer. But when the University of California scientists checked in on men who had been meditating after just 5 months, they found that their telomere length had increased significantly by an average of 10%. In announcing their findings, Professor Dean Ornish said that he believed that it wasn't an exaggeration, that meditation could actually fight cancer. These comprehensive lifestyle changes may significantly reduce the risk of a wide variety of diseases and premature mortality, he wrote. Our genes and our telomeres are a predisposition, but they are not necessarily our fate. Studies are also finding that meditation is very effective in calming our nervous system. According to an article published by the medical journal, The Lancet Oncology, the practice of meditation does work related to activating the parasympathetic and quieting the sympathetic nervous system. In other words, meditation can help increase the flow of your blood and digestive juices, parasympathetic, while at the same time keeping your breathing and heart rate low, sympathetic, which is where you want them to be. And while noting that studies are still inconclusive, the Mayo Clinic has identified several other physical ailments that seemed to be improved by meditation, including allergies, asthma, pain, substance abuse, and binge eating. More on those last two shortly. Meditation and your diet. Chances are you probably spend a good deal of time worrying about your weight. The percentages vary from year to year, but generally, over half of the country is on a diet at any given time. Yet, studies show that almost 80% of people who do lose weight on one of those diets end up gaining it back. If you've ever experienced that kind of yo-yo dieting, then you know how deflating it can be. You pour a tremendous amount of energy into exercise and regulating the types of foods you eat. After you reach whatever goal you set for yourself, you go out and buy some new clothes and get to spend a couple of weeks, or maybe even months, enjoying the new you. But in time, your ability to watch what you eat starts to fade, and your commitment to exercise starts to waver. Soon the pounds start to pile back on, and before you know it, it's time to purchase those new you pants. It's time to put those new you pants in the closet and pull out your old fat clothes. When that happens, it can become very easy to give up all hope that you will ever lose weight again. After all, you did everything you were supposed to, but it just didn't stick. I guess a lot of people tell themselves, I'm just always going to be fat. But what I'm here to tell you is that you can change the basic nature of your relationship with food through meditation. That's because when you meditate, you will become much more mindful of not only the food you put in your body, but how it actually tastes while you're eating it. Thinking about food might not seem like a way to lose weight. After all, we've been conditioned to believe that the only way to do that is to either starve yourself on a diet or exercise like a crazy person. But more and more experts, including my good friends Deepak Chopra and Dr. Oz, are starting to recommend meditation as a way to access the mindful eating habits that will help you lose weight once and for all. Instead of getting trapped in that cycle of losing weight when you're on a diet and gaining it right back once you go off it, you can have a much healthier and more balanced approach to what you eat. An approach that will allow you to eat all sorts of different foods, but in much healthier portions. And perhaps more important, a relationship in which you sit down to eat when you are physically hungry as opposed to emotionally hungry. Because as Deepak puts it, there are two reasons people put food in their bodies. One is they are physically hungry. The other is they are emotionally hungry. And if you put food in your body to satisfy your emotional hunger, you're going to gain weight. Let me be very clear here. I'm not saying that when you start meditating, the pounds are just going to magically start falling off of you. Instead, what I'm suggesting is that as you spend more and more time in stillness, the distractions that you have making poor choices when it comes to food will start to slip away. And as you become more conscious of those choices, you'll feel more empowered to change them. Instead of helping you embark on a diet, meditation will help you embark on a lifestyle change. It's going to help you re-examine your entire relationship with food and learn how to stop being controlled by what your body thinks it needs or what society is telling you to crave. Regulating how much you eat. So what is mindful eating? And how is it going to help you lose weight? Essentially, mindful eating is the practice of slowing down and savoring each bite of your food, instead of eating it unconsciously. In mindful eating, when you bite into a piece of food, you stay focused on how it smells, how it tastes, its texture, and its color. That might seem like very simplistic advice. After all, who doesn't know what their food tastes like or smells like? But if we're being honest, the answer is most of us. That's because we've become conditioned in this country to eat our food distractedly. And you know what I'm talking about. How many times have you eaten your dinner in front of the TV or while you were reading a magazine? Or had a snack while you were talking on the phone? Or even driving your car? Probably pretty often. And when you eat that way, you're not truly experiencing the food that you're putting in your mouth. Sure, you might taste the first bite or two of that sandwich or piece of cake, but after a few minutes, your thoughts get so wrapped up in that TV show or the conversation that you're having with your friend that you can look down and suddenly there's an empty plate in front of you and you can barely remember what that food even tasted like. When you eat that way, not only are you robbing yourself of the pleasure of experiencing just how good a piece of pie can taste, but you're also making it more likely that you'll eat more pie than you really need. Because if you eat a piece of pie to sate a hunger, especially an emotional one, if you don't even remember eating it, what are you going to do once you're finished? Eat some more. And that's how you find yourself binging and wolfing down a whole pie, tub of ice cream, or box of cookies without even knowing it. Eating without thinking about what you're putting in your mouth might seem like a silly thing to do, but we're actually encouraged to eat that way. Think about what sort of foods you're usually eating when you binge. It usually isn't healthy foods like strawberries or eggplant or brown rice. No, when you start shoveling down food without thinking about it, it's usually processed foods. I'm talking about ice cream, cookies, potato chips, candy, pretzels, sugary cereals, the omnipresent snacks that it seems hard to say no to. And you know why saying no seems so hard? It's not because those processed sweets or fatty foods truly taste so good, but because they've been genetically engineered to make you crave them. That's right. The big food companies literally have teams of scientists whose only job is to try to figure out ways to make you crave these products. This should be illegal, but instead it's happening in plain sight. An award-winning reporter for the New York Times named Michael Moss recently wrote an excellent and disturbing book on this called Salt, Sugar, Fat: How the Food Giants Hooked Us. In the book, Moss talks about how scientists have perfected the bliss point in many of these products. The bliss point is the perfect amount of sugar that will give you a high and get you hooked on a type of cookie or cereal. Moss also writes about how those scientists have perfected what the industry calls mouth feel. You might not know the term, but you definitely know the feel. That warm, satisfying sensation you experience when you bite into melted cheese or some crispy fried chicken. Unfortunately, Mouthfeel comes from super high levels of fat, which create the same high that sugar does, but comes with even more calories. Remember, these addictive qualities aren't a coincidence. These foods have been developed and marketed by the food giants to get you hooked. As Moss told Time magazine, in some ways, getting unhooked on processed food is harder than getting unhooked on narcotics, but you can't go cold turkey. You can't just stop eating. The head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse in Washington says that it's more difficult for people to control their eating habits than narcotics. She is hugely empathic with overeaters. Not to be too dramatic, but every time you walk into a supermarket, especially the center aisles where the popular salty and sugary items are always stocked, you're basically under attack. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent so that you will not only buy an item that's unhealthy for you, but also keep coming back for it time and time again. So the question becomes, since the food giants are pushing these products that are so difficult to eat in moderation, how can we change our relationship with what we eat? Instead of gorging on sugary, fatty, and salty foods, how can we learn to eat smaller portions but still get that enjoyment that we've come to associate with those processed foods? And the answer, many researchers are discovering, is through meditation. For instance, Professor Jean Christeller of Indiana State University recently created a program called Mindfulness-Based Eating Awareness Training, or MB-EAT, which uses meditation to teach people how to start eating smaller portions. The idea behind MB-EAT is that when people start tasting their food again, instead of just wolfing it down unconsciously, they become more aware of their actual appetite. Instead of getting tricked by their emotions, which often tell you to eat whether you're hungry or not, people who eat mindfully can teach themselves to eat only when they're truly hungry. As Dr. Christeller tells Boston.com, our taste buds actually get tired rather quickly. The mindfulness can help people undo habits that have been there for decades. Dr. Christeller's MB-EAT program is really very simple. The next time you're hungry for a snack, put a handful of raisins in a bowl, and then close your eyes. Put one into your mouth, and keeping your eyes closed, eat it taking the smallest bites possible. Then take another one, and eat it the same way, really trying to focus on experiencing the incredible flavor and sensations created by each tiny bite of those raisins. When you eat them slowly and mindfully, instead of quickly and distractedly, the way most people eat snacks, you'll be stunned by how much flavor each raisin has. You'll quickly realize that you can actually satisfy whatever hunger you are feeling with just a handful of them, as opposed to wolfing down a whole box. Then try the same exercise with a cookie or ice cream. Though as a vegan, I would strongly recommend you try almond, soy, or rice milk, which is much better for you than milk-based ice creams, but still tastes great. As you eat it, really focus on experiencing just how rich and satisfying that single bite tastes, and then leave it at that. If you feel an urge to have more, don't give into it and dig back into the container again and again until you're bloated and feeling like crap about yourself. Accept that you got all you needed out of that one bite. That might sound impossible to people who've spent too many nights devouring tubs of Rocky Road and cookies and cream, but to someone who meditates, it actually sounds perfectly doable. Because once again, meditation trains your brain to see the distractions for what they are, rather than be entangled in them. Another way to help yourself slow down and be mindful when you eat is to focus on where your food came from. Americans have developed a very bad habit of thinking that their food originates in its packaging. That raisins are supposed to come in a box, or peaches in a can, or even that a cut of meat has always been wrapped in plastic as opposed to once having been attached to an animal. And it's understandable. Most of us weren't raised on farms. We were raised shopping in supermarkets. Our relationship with food is solely as consumers, not as producers. But try to stop and take the time to really think about how that piece of fruit you're eating was made, how a seed had to be planted in the ground and then nurtured with water, and hopefully not exposed to any pesticides and sunlight until it was ripe, how a laborer had to pick it without harming it, then haul it around until it was ready to be put in a truck and then brought to you. When you think about all the work and effort that went into the raisin or blueberry you're about to put into your mouth, you'll get much more enjoyment out of it. You'll have a much greater appreciation for what you're eating, and you won't feel the need to eat nearly as much as if you were just mindlessly chewing away while you watch TV or surf the net. Conversely, if you really thought about the origins of that ice cream you're about to dig into, you'd probably be a lot less likely to binge out and eat the whole thing in one sitting. If you thought about how each of those bites will contain ingredients like disodium, phosphate, benzyl acetate, monostearate, propylene glycol, sodium benzoate, polysorbate 80, potassium sorbate, and modified cornstarch, then you'd be a lot more likely to stop after one small bowl, no matter how good it tasted. That's the power of mindfulness. When you're conscious of what you're actually putting into your body, as opposed to just giving yourself over to your cravings, you're going to eat much more selectively and healthily. It's okay to mess up. Meditation isn't going to make it much easier for you to become conscious of what you're eating, but perhaps just as important, it's also going to help you remember that it's not the end of the world. Repeating. Meditation is going to make it much easier for you to become conscious of what you're eating. But perhaps just as important, it's also going to help you remember that it's not the end of the world if you do mess up and break your diet. A lot of folks tend to rely on willpower when it comes to dieting. In other words, they try to force themselves not to have what they think they want. They don't question whether or not the desire is real, but try to refuse to give into it. The problem with that approach is that often, when those people eventually break down and have that cookie or piece of cake, as we all do at some point, they feel that they've somehow lost that power they've been clinging to. Instead of getting back on their diet, they feel powerless to fight their urges, and they start binging all over again. Trust me, I've been there. Even though I've been a vegan for 15 years, there have been dozens, if not hundreds of times where I've slipped up and given into an urge. Maybe it was snacking a fork full of fish off of a friend's plate and gobbling it down before they could even say stop, or even just allowing myself a little egg noodle. The key is, when I do break down and cheat with a piece of fish, it doesn't rob me of my focus or dedication. I don't start telling myself I'm too weak to do this, or that now I'm no longer a vegan. While my intention is to live a vegan lifestyle, I'm not perfect, and I accept my imperfection, which is why when I slip up, I don't start worrying about what other vegans would think if they knew I'd eaten some meat. Because if I allow myself to get caught up in those distractions, then I'll feel like I failed at being a vegan, will find myself back eating meat all the time again, which of course, in my eyes, would be the real failure. Instead, I consider what just happened. Basically that I became distracted by an urge. And rather than beat myself up over it, I just return to my vegan practice the next time I sit down to a meal. I also want to note that as we've already discussed, meditation dramatically cuts down on stress. This is very important as it relates to diet because one of the things stress does is make you feel hungrier than you actually are. When you're stressed out, your brain basically starts sending out the same signals that it would if you were actually starving. Quote, stress affects the same signals as famine does. It turns on the brain pathways that make us crave dense calories. We'll choose high fat, high sweet foods, or high salt, end quote. Alyssa Epple, the founder and director of the Center for Obesity Assessment, Study and Treatment at the University of California, San Francisco, tells Greater Good, a journal of the University of California, Berkeley. When we have a stress brain, food is even more rewarding. This connection between emotional stress and eating is even stronger among women. Epple says that surveys have shown 50 to 60% of women eat for emotional reasons rather than because of hunger. What that means is that when you move through life in a highly anxious and emotional state, it's likely that you're going to try to use food, especially sweets, to soothe that anxiety. But the truth is that sweets will never drown out the anxiety or uneasiness you might be feeling. All they're going to do is make you gain weight and most likely feel even worse about yourself. Professor Christeller also found that meditation was particularly helpful for women who are struggling with weight loss. Working with Duke University's world-famous Diet and Fitness Center, Professor Christeller put a group of obese women through a 4-month version of MB Eat with an emphasis on mindfulness. At the end of the course, she found that the women had already begun to develop healthier relationships with the food they were eating, and as a result, were losing weight. According to Professor Costello, their success at losing weight was directly related to the degree to which they used mindfulness techniques. As the iconic Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh recently said in an interview with Oprah magazine, mindful eating is one of the most powerful stress relievers that we have at our disposal. If I can just look deeply into my food and take this time as a meditation, just as important as my sitting or walking meditation time, I receive the many gifts of the cosmos that I would not otherwise profit from if my mind were elsewhere. Because if I eat and am consumed by my worries and projects, I'm eating a lot of stress and fear, and this is harmful to my body and mind. Uncomforting food. Understanding the link between stress and emotional eating is especially important for African Americans, since as we're constantly reminded, it's easy to perceive being African American as particularly stressful. I've come to understand over time that you should never let outside influences affect your relationship with the world. Ultimately, you have complete control over whether you are happy or unhappy in life. But I also understand that whether it's being profiled by cops, consistently stereotyped by the media, or judged by potential employers, African Americans are forced to deal with a lot of perceived stresses that are unique to our situation. Unfortunately, one of the ways that we've collectively come to deal with those stresses is through eating so-called comfort foods. You know, foods like fried chicken, ribs, cornbread, mac and cheese, and fried fish, which we tell each other will bring a sense of peace into our lives. I was certainly raised that way. Growing up, it was almost as if eating comfort food was the most accessible way of dealing with the stresses, disappointments, and injustices that seem to be inherent in the African American experience. If you questioned your plate of ham hocks, black-eyed peas, and cornbread, it was almost like you were questioning your blackness. But the sad truth is that any comfort those foods created only lasted for a moment. Because what happens just a few minutes after you polish off a plate of succulent ribs or put away a fat, juicy steak? That's right, you catch the itis. That's the term that Black folks affectionately use to describe the sluggish feeling you get after eating soul food. But the truth is, there's something cute about the itis. Instead, that feeling of lethargy is your body's way of telling you that what you just ate wasn't good for you. And it's not a subtle warning either. Yet people ignore that warning for years and years because they're simply not listening to what their bodies are telling them. How much more clear could your body be about the dangers of eating ribs than making you want to fall asleep moments after you've eaten them? Not much. But because they're distracted, people continue to ignore those warnings and pollute their bodies with harmful, unhealthy food until tragically, in many cases, it's too late. So while soul food might be comforting to our emotions, it's not comforting to our bodies. Rather than bring you peace, these foods only end up making it more likely that you're going to have a serious health problem with high blood pressure, obesity, and strokes. Trust me, when it came to soul food, I used to get down with the best of them. I've often said that back in the day, I'd eat ribs, flanks, chitlins, buffalo wings, pig's feet, probably even an elephant's ass if you had to put it on a plate in front of me. I never spent a moment considering what sort of damage that food was wreaking on me, because I had grown up listening to the world instead of my body. And the world told me that greasy, fatty meats should make me happy and content. So that's what I believed, despite all the evidence to the contrary, until I woke up. I use the term wake up because I believe that eating meat actually represents unconscious behavior. We all know in our hearts that eating meat is wrong, bad for what it does to our bodies, and terrible for the suffering it creates for the animals that are killed on our behalf. When the Bible spoke of giving man dominion over the animals, the intention wasn't to co-sign an industrial farming industry that slaughters more than 10 billion land animals in the United States each year alone. A farming industry that is one of the biggest contributors to global warming. I suspect the damage eating meat is causing is why Albert Einstein once said, "Nothing will benefit human health and increase the chances for survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." Yet often, until we learn how to be still through a tool like meditation, we can't hear that truth in our hearts because we're so distracted by the noise of those who would have us believe eating meat is okay. I can say that without reservation. I can say without reservation that I would have never become a vegan if I hadn't started meditating first. Without meditation, I would have continued to be a sheep, a follower who kept engaging in the harmful acts because everyone else was doing it too. Meditation gave me both the clarity to see that I didn't like harming animals, and then the confidence to actually act on that information. Once I woke up, I could see that passing out on the sofa after dinner isn't a good thing, that there must be a reason my body could barely function after I ate meat. Once I woke up, I could look at a rib and make that connection that it actually came from an animal that suffered very badly. Thankfully, I woke up before I could do any further damage to myself, or even worse, pass those habits along to my children. And hopefully, after reading this section, if you still eat meat, you'll wake up too. Tips for mindful eating. I know that most of you weren't expecting a lecture on eating meat and a book about meditation, but one of the wonderful things about operating out of stillness is that it allows you to address issues in your life that you might not even have been aware of. But ultimately, as much as I'd love for each and every one of you to cut meat out of your diet, the first step I'd like you to take is simply being a more mindful eater. The more you meditate, the more you'll naturally become more mindful. But I also want to share a few simple tips you can incorporate into your lifestyle that will speed up your mindfulness. 1. Turn off the TV when you eat. This is one of the most common forms of mindless eating. When you eat while you watch TV, you end up barely paying attention to your food, which is why it becomes so easy to eat way more than you ever intended to without even realizing it. 2. Unplug your computer too. Even a decade ago, this probably wasn't an issue for most people. But today, eating while surfing the net probably rivals TV as a cause of mindless eating. 3. Don't eat while you drive. No matter how hungry you feel, you're not going to starve if you wait a few minutes to get where you're going and eat and then eat. Even if you simply sit in your car with the ignition off and eat once you get there, it's a much more mindful experience than eating while you're driving. Plus, it's safer too. 4. Try eating in silence. I know that this seems to run counter to what many of us consider a desirable eating experience, good food and good conversation, but eating in silence really does promote mindfulness. Obviously, you're not going to eat every meal in silence, but see if you can commit to at least one meal a week, where instead of talking to someone, you pour all your focus and energy into the food you're putting into your body. A lot of people are starting to see the value in this. At the Google headquarters in Mountain View, California, the company hosts an hour-long wordless lunch once a month. Interestingly enough, a lot of the participants are the engineers, which pleases us very much, says Olivia Wu, an executive chief at Google, told the New York Times. I think it quiets the mind. I think there is a real sense of feeling restored so that they can go back to the crazy place they came from. 5. Eat slowly. With our schedules getting busier and our time seemingly stretched thinner and thinner, I know it gets tempting to rush through meals, especially when so much food today is marketed to be eaten on the go. But instead of wolfing down that sandwich or hamburger, try to eat it as slowly as you can. First, make sure you put your fork down after each bite. You might not even be aware of it, but you probably are already getting your next piece of food ready while you're still chewing your last bite. By simply remembering to put your fork back down on your plate after you take a bite, you can dramatically slow down your pace. Then, after you do take a bite, whenever you feel like you normally would be ready to swallow, try to chew another 15 times. It might feel awkward at first, but if you can condition yourself to chew your food longer and slower, it's going to go a long way toward creating a mindful eating experience. And finally, try to remember that while eating mindfully might feel strange at first, it's actually the most healthy and rewarding relationship you can have with the food you eat. Which is why, while the findings of the MB Eat program and what they're doing at Google are really encouraging, the fact is people have been employing techniques like this for thousands and thousands of years. Even the Buddha himself was known to promote mindful eating as a path to contentment. Hunger is the supreme disease, he taught, while also reminding people true happiness is the end of craving. Our collective health. Given that such highly respected institutions as Harvard, UCLA, Massachusetts General Hospital, the Mayo Clinic, and so many others are going on record with the fact that meditation improves our brains and promotes better health across the board, whenever I hear politicians complaining about our healthcare system, I wish they could understand how much suffering we could relieve and how much money we could save by promoting meditation. Dr. Benson, who conducted the study on sleep and meditation at Harvard over 30 years ago, has a great analogy for the role meditation can play in our national healthcare debate. He says that medical treatment is like a three-legged stool. One leg is pharmaceuticals, one is surgery, and one is mind-body interactions like meditation and yoga. But as a society, we're only focused on those first two legs. Collectively, we need to start paying much more attention to that mind-body leg, or else that stool is going to break and we're all going to fall on our butts. We don't have enough money for good schooling or housing in this country, yet we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on poor people and increasingly the middle class too, without insurance, who have to go to emergency rooms to treat conditions like high blood pressure, asthma, hypertension, pneumonia, bad circulation, and migraines. We could be treating, and even better, helping people avoid so many of those ailments by simply teaching them how to meditate. It would cost only a fraction of the money we spend on emergency room visits and would go so far to improve the health and happiness of our country. On a personal level, I can't remember the last time I got a cold. Doesn't mean I won't get one tomorrow, but it does mean that since I've started meditating, my nervous system has grown much stronger. I'm constantly on planes, arriving in cities in the middle of the night, going in and out of hotels, the type of lifestyle that would typically leave a person run down and sick all the time. But I've never felt healthier. And I attribute that to the effect meditating has had on my nervous system. Doctors and scientists around the country are noticing the same thing too. In fact, last year, a study in the American Journal of Health Promotion found that people who practiced TM for 5 years experienced a 28% cumulative decrease in physician fees during that time period. Considering that the average family of 4 pays around $19,000 a year in health costs, that's a pretty big incentive to start the practice. So to anyone out there who's worried about their weight or worried about heart disease or worried about their rising medical costs, I want to ask you this. Is there any good reason why you wouldn't be interested in not only saving yourself thousands of dollars every year, but also potentially saving your life by simply sitting in silence for 20 minutes 2 times a day? I didn't think so.